What's going on, guys? Coach Gaglione here. If this is your first time stopping by, I'm Coach Gaglione, and I've been about powerlifting and strength coaching for over 19 years. This is another edition of our Return to Mr. America series. If you haven't been with us for a while, I've done a lot of things in powerlifting. I've been competing since 2006. First and only known man to squat 800 pounds in 6 weight classes. I've total elite in 5 different weight classes. Got a 2,100 pound total to my credit. It's my best in competition. And so now over the last several years, we were always really involved with powerlifting, especially in the Northeast region of the United States. And now I reside in lovely Milton, Delaware. And outside of powerlifting, we've been getting more involved with strict curl. One of the things I've been trying to articulate is just not just powerlifting is kind of like a means to an end. And I think strict curl is another great thing. And I can kind of get into like why I'm kind of an advocate for those particular strength sports, but at the crux of it, it's very scalable. Strict curl is even more scalable than powerlifting because in most competitions, you could take like a half kilo increase. So very, and then a lot of times like the starting weight, it's going to be 15 kilos. So very, very low barrier of entry. You could be very conservative with your increases. Powerlifting, it's usually a 2.5 kilo increment or 5 pounds if you're doing a pounds meet. And most people can go do these movements. In powerlifting, maybe there will be points in time in someone's lifespan. We just saw like the powerlifting event where we had a lot of disabled athletes kind of compete. I've also, kind of worked with USA powerlifting. So if you're not familiar with that, essentially it's different categories of disabilities are able to compete. So if you have people with like amputations, for example, spinal cord injuries, those sorts of things. But anyways, what I'm kind of getting at is that in terms of powerlifting, the vast majority of people can squat, bench, or deadlift in some capacity, in some combination of those events. And the same kind of goes for strict curl. And if you do have an athlete that is with a spinal cord injury, there's usually kind of like a wheelchair division for that as well. But anyways, I kind of digress. So the pursuit of strength is really important. So like for someone like myself, I've squatted 900 pounds in competition. I've done 1,000 pounds in training. 38 years old, started competing at 18 years old. For me, the pursuit of strength is really important. And outside of the pursuit of strength, for me, it's always trying to refine and improve my skills in the weight room so I could become a better coach. I want to make sure that I'm kind of maintaining my muscle mass as I age. I think that's important. I definitely still need to kind of trim down some body fat, which we'll get into in a second. And then outside of that, seeking out camaraderie and competition. So these are just some things I'm going to be kind of talking about in more detail. I'll probably do like a solo podcast on. So like for me, is working towards 160, 170, 180 pound strict curl quite as exciting as putting 800 plus pounds on my back? Maybe not. But the idea of competing against people and then pursuing strength, those things are very interesting to me, and that's where I'm a big advocate for powerlifting. There will be a point in time for us all, Father Time is undefeated, where there's going to be a point in time where you just can't hit absolute strength PRs anymore. And at that point, it's good to kind of look at, can I hit PRs for my age group? I think every 5 to 10 years, it's good to reset. Can I hit PRs in a different weight class? As you get older, I think it's good to get lighter and leaner. I'm not doing a really good job with that, but I have done a good job with that over the years. So kind of circling back to my return to Mr. America. So the last time I did the Mr. America was actually for bodybuilding. And then maybe I'll kind of flash some pictures on the screen or kind of show you because I have some pictures over here. But that was a really important milestone for me. I've been as heavy as 340 pounds. I was about 198 pounds on stage. So that was really cool. And like I said, that was without any really kind of major water manipulation and stuff like that where, I've competed in the 198s as a teenager. I've competed in the 198s as an adult. But that required a lot of water manipulation and definitely, tricks and things of that nature to kind of get down to that weight. But I was 198 pounds on the stage. Absolutely shredded, at least for me, separation of all the muscles, and I looked great. So I took second in the Mr. America amateur contest, and then kind of from there, I kind of had a really good run on just hitting some of my best pound for pound numbers. Like I said, I did a 2,100 total in the 242 class. At the Arnold, I have my belt up there for my championship. I got a best lifter award for that, for like, you know, the quote unquote like amateur day, the elite day. So day one of the contest. I've done a 2080 total in the 220 weight class. And then most recently, I also did like a 635, like equipped bench. So really outside of like hitting a 700-pound deadlift in competition, I've done a 700-pound deadlift in competition with only one white light, so it's not official on the books, and I've done a 700-pound deadlift or in training or more on 2 separate occasions, you know, as far as with straight weight and all those things. So outside of that lift, I'm really happy like with what I'm done in powerlifting. So having something like another strength sport like strict curl, and then for those that kind of like, again are not aware, I'm still kind of using powerlifting as a means to get generally strong, and I think that's a really good like avenue for people. So I'm kind of using powerlifting as movements, heavy compound barbell movements as my kind of strength and skill development, nervous system development, power development. And I could probably do a little bit more athletic movements here and there just for general athleticism, but that's a topic for another day. And then a lot of bodybuilding kind of accessory work, which you'll kind of see. I've been doing some stuff at this new gym called Peak Fitness, which is great. But I do think that like kind of training in a group setting, having that camaraderie, and so strict curl doesn't really necessarily lend itself to team training, but if you look at someone like John Cooper and Bruce Knox, you know, they'll have training partners. So I do think training partners will kind of take you further, and even if you don't need them. But the nice thing about strict curl is that it is very safe. If you do need to kind of bail out, it's really not like it's not like a high risk maneuver like a heavy, you know, barbell back squat or heavy bench press. Obviously you could do these things with safeties and stuff, but again, things could happen. So pretty low risk. So going into the Mr. America contest this year, it's going to be with the APA. They use a more traditional easy bar. To my knowledge, the competition bar is this Hampton bar. So it's going to be much more difficult because the load is going to be further away from the elbow joint. So like in something like a gopher bar, when there's deeper bends, you can kind of really get your hands deep in there. A lot of people think it's just like the close grip, but it's really more about like the deep bends of the bar. So I'm not going to be able to have a legitimate shot at like my goal of 185 at this particular meet, just because the barbell is going to put me at a disadvantage. But I am going to try to be as competitive as I can. If I could hit the biggest curl at the contest, that'd be great. If I could win my weight class, that'd be great. But if also I could just set a personal record on this bar, that would be great. So recently, I've done, we're about 6 weeks out and some change, so about 6 weeks of training left. So I have 2 3-week waves of training left. So essentially what I'm doing on my max effort day, which is today, I'm doing heavy triple, some reverse band work, and then it's kind of, you know, using that as my, you know, and some heavy holds. So triples on week 1, doubles on week 2, singles on week 3, rinse and repeat. And you guys will also see some my dynamic effort speed training with some workup sets. So I have a heavy day, which is going to primarily be doubles, singles, and triples, highly specific with some overload work. On day 2, which I won't do a voiceover on, when I'm doing more of my volume and my special exercises, that's going to be mostly seated curls and preacher curls, and kind of the idea, kind of like if you just did like deficits and block pulls for the deadlift, or if you did like halting deadlifts and block pulls, you're essentially kind of working more of a disadvantaged position in the bottom, and then more of a disadvantage, more like of an overloaded type position to work the lockout. Although again, you can like argue like what works to lockout, what works to, but that's neither here nor there. But essentially you're working different aspects of the lift, and you're challenging, you know, the movement at different points in the lift. But essentially the seated curl is going to be more like the top 3/4, top half of the movement, and the preacher curl is going to really disadvantage yourself in the bottom, whereas normally in like a regular barbell curl, you're not really loaded in the bottom. So it's going to help kind of protect you, especially if you ever get more outside of your groove in the strict curl. So anything over 65 kilos would be like a win for today. So I'll probably do something, you know, in the neighborhood of maybe just shy of 150 pounds. I believe that around 150 is my best double. I'll have to kind of check exactly what I did on the video. But right now, 72.5 kilos, 160, around 160, you know, it's 159.8. So sue me if you want to, you know, but I'm going to give myself the extra 0.2. So I'm working in kilos. I'm not sure if the meet's going to be in pounds or kilos, because I know they're working on some sponsorships and stuff like that. But anyways, we're gonna get in today's video. We're working up to a heavy triple today. So you're gonna kind of see the Hampton bar versus the Gopher bar. It's much less forgiving, and you really have to kind of accelerate through the whole range of motion. Whereas with the Gopher bar, sometimes if you can get your timing down, it'll almost kind of assist you with like kind of that flip over. So in both events, both bars, the start is really, really important. But as far as the transition, in the Hampton bar, you really got to make sure that you're kind of, you're pushing through the whole rep, the whole range of motion. And that's also one of the reasons why I think that chain training is very important. And basically with the chain training, you know, we're going to use a daisy strap like we do for everything, and just kind of put the chains usually in the center unless we're using a wood platform. So anyways, kind of a little bit long-winded there, but I wanted to just give you guys a quick like intro, and then we'll kind of get into the training, and I'll kind of provide some commentary in between our sets. All right, so we're gonna take the empty bar, and then usually I'll put like either, depending on this bar, sometimes I'll do a smaller jump, but I'll usually put on greens, then blues, and then kind of go from there. So with the greens on, I think it's about like 70 pounds or so. With the blues on, it's like 120. And then after like kind of 120, I'll take smaller jumps from there. So no matter what the bar is, that setup is the same. And then one thing I've been kind of working on is just get my arms longer at the start. So I'm going to go through the first couple of sets kind of on the faster side, then go from there. All right, so we got 30 kilos on the bar, 35 kilos on the bar, which is about 77 pounds. Not bad. All right, so going up to 120 next, which is about 55 kilos. So, you know, normally on a Gopher bar, this is something where I don't really have to stress too much over in terms of like getting things right. But again, with this bar, being a little bit, you know, less forgiving, you know, it's going to be a different animal in terms of just, you know, making sure that I'm able to kind of transition through the lockout much better. It's just, again, I think it's a good way to think about it is like a stiff bar versus a deadlift bar. And, you know, for a newer lifter, sometimes, like, especially something like a kabuki, the whippier the bar, the more you could potentially do, but the more that bar can also throw you out of position. Whereas, so like this Hampton bar or like an OBZ bar that a lot of lifters on the West Coast are more familiar with, there's just going to be less variables in terms of it kind of rolling on you, it getting out of position. So the straighter the bar, it's going to be like a lot more forgiving in terms of it like rolling on you, in terms of stuff like that. So the deeper the bends, the more there's kind of like a chance, and also like the length of the bar. So if you look at some of the barbells overseas, those are like more kind of full-size rackable bars. So I would imagine if there's a little bit of a deviation, if I could imagine if, you know, it's going to be more of a consequence if you are a little bit like off your form. So those are just some things to consider. This Hampton bar is a little bit more compact, a little bit less of deep bends in those cambers here. So if you are a little bit off your form, So this bar is going to kind of favor like a stronger athlete. Same thing with like a stiff bar. If someone's just really strong, stiff bar, especially off the floor, it's not going to really affect them in a deadlift. But a whippier bar, a bendier bar is going to favor a more technical athlete. And again, that's kind of the argument. So I think that, and that's one of the things I really love about equipped lifting. There's a combination of strength and skill. And it feels more, there's more like ways to win. There's more ways to kind of game the competition. So again, is it like the truest test of strength? I would say no, but you could even argue again, that's where like people are like, oh, you should ban sumo, you should ban arching. But at the end of the day, we all have different like limb lengths and heights and sizes and all these different things. So the only true thing that you can compare, if you're in the same weight class and you're comparing yourself to yourself, and if you're getting better, that's why I think the pursuit of strength and seeking out competition is good, but most people should be just really seeking out competition within themselves. But that being said, we are human, and I think it is good to like, have training partners some training partners that are kind of a little bit behind you and some training partners that are a little bit ahead of you, so you guys can kind of push each other. They say rising tide raises all ships, excuse me. So anyway, it's just one of those things where sometimes it's not to say that you want to make excuses, but you can't really, there's a lot of things that are like out of our control, especially like in terms of our height, in terms of our proportions. We can put on more muscle, we can get leaner, and we can improve our skill. So I think that's depending on what your goals are. Again, but I do think it's important to kind of take the skill, but also like there's a point where you can kind of, if you miss sight of like the point of the strength sports is to get stronger. So get your skill to like a certain point, always work on refining it. But at a certain point, you got to just like, kind of lift more weight. You got to get bigger and you got to get stronger. So we're going to go into 55 kilos, next triple. Gonna get some chalk. Forgot where I was going for a second. All right, so we're going to elect to go. So we're at 55 kilos. We're going to go to 62 and a half, and then probably go to 67, because that'll be a PR triple on this bar. Just kind of like check the video. I think a lot of people, especially when you start kind of doing more social media stuff, I think that, outside of the sessions, it's kind of getting longer. It can be really kind of easy to get distracted. So I think like with these mic'd up sessions, I think my plan is to, even though I'm a, coach first, athlete second, content creator third, I still like care about, I care about my results and, doing the best I can. And it can be really easy to kind of get distracted because you start to kind of get fixated. Is the lighting good? Is the video good? And I think that could be like a trap, because I do think that creating a personal brand is important. And, I think that it's a good opportunity. But again, I think that, I don't know, like for me, like personally, one of the reasons why I've always promoted, the reasons why I also do events, the reasons why I do seminars, clinics, I'm big on education. It's, a lot of people throw around the word coach, a lot of people throw around the word coach, a lot of people throw around the word team. I don't see a lot of either thing is going on. But anyways, especially when it comes to coaching, it can be really easy to get distracted with if you're trying to take videos, you're trying to take all this stuff. It's one of those things I kind of really realized kind of later on when Larry Wheels, and if those aren't familiar, Larry Williams, one of the most accomplished raw powerlifters of this era, this decade, 3 all-time world records, 3 weight classes. There's only a handful of people really to kind of accomplish such a feat, especially. But anyways, again, after kind of he broke his last the world record in the 308 weight class, he weighed in the 280s, did that the Arnold 2020s. So, but the same year I kind of did the Mr. America contest. It could be, you have to kind of understand what's the intent of the day, what's the goal of the session, and if you start to kind of draw your attention, even right now, I've been kind of training with music less a lot. I've been using headphones less. I just want to be kind of more in tune with what's going on. Now, sometimes headphones could be good to kind of cancel out what's going on around you, but if you're not kind of paying attention to your training partners, if you're not paying attention to the workout, if you're more fixated on the video production, if you're more fixated on music, on social media, playing with your phone, it can be really easy to get distracted. So that's where for these next 3 weeks, I'll probably take you along the journey with me. And then the final 3 weeks, I'll probably do the voiceovers after. I know it's not as fun, but I still care about my result. So I think that's important that I also kind of showcase that, even if the content, like I said, my views and stuff, since I got started, because we have a decent amount of subscribers and stuff, but I'm just there's certain things that if I'm sacrificing my coaching quality in person, if I'm sacrificing just my bandwidth for my family, for the athletes that we work with, and in my own training, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze. Again, I would love to have, if there's more, funds and stuff, and I could have someone help me with this. But right now, I'm kind of doing a lot of the, filming and stuff myself. So, anyways, just something to consider if you're kind of younger, and because I do think it's important to, leverage what you're doing. And I think, taking a page from kind of Gary V's, I think that if you could just document versus create, especially if you are an athlete or a coach, I think that helps. So I'm kind of doing this contest. So instead of trying to figure out what educational thing to discuss, I'm just going to kind of document what I'm doing, because I think a lot of people are kind of interested on the journey, the specifics, and this is actually what I'm doing. It's not just some made up thing, because a lot of things, unfortunately, are smoke and mirrors online, but not at Gaglione Strength. So anyways, this will be kind of the last warm up, and then I'll kind of do my top set. Then we'll do some overload work, a heavy hold. So kind of a quicker session today, but these sessions are going to be low volume, high effort / high intensity, essentially the load on the bar. So when we talk about intensity for powerlifting and for strength training in general, when we say high intensity, it's going to be high load. And then sometimes when you talk about high intensity in terms of bodybuilding, you also are talking about proximity to failure. But essentially, if the load on the bar is greater, in some ways you are getting closer to failure anyway. But again, high effort, high intensity essentially means that it's going to be a higher percentage of your 1 rep max, and it's going to just be more load on the bar. So I got to take this set a little bit more seriously, so I'm going to stop yapping, and then we'll kind of go into the top set of the day. All right, we got 62 and a half kilos on the bar, so about a little over 135. 137 and some change. Let's get it. All right, still pretty speedy. Grip wasn't my best, but so we're gonna go up to 67 and a half and give that a go. So I remember the first time I started using this bar, really anything over 120 felt pretty hard. So it's tough to kind of go backwards sometimes if you are, sometimes when you're changing your technique, Or if you're going to a different barbell, maybe you're going from, and it doesn't always have to be, but if you're going from like a stiff bar to a deadlift bar, or vice versa, if you're going from conventional to sumo, if you're going from, walked out to monolift, just because something is like theoretically easier doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to kind of take advantage of like a mechanical advantage like right away. So sometimes it's good to take a step back, to take one step back, take 2 steps forward. So just keep that in mind anytime you are making any major changes to your technique, or even just going from like pound plates to kilos. And the stronger you are, the more these kind of details matter. You shouldn't sweat the small stuff, but it is important to just realize that when your environment's different, when the equipment's different, when your technique is different, give yourself a little grace, and especially if you're in like a different weight class, a different age category. So again, going back to like this pursuit of strength, the pursuit of strength doesn't necessarily mean that you always have to be setting all-time PRs all the time. That's been something where, I think powerlifting is kind of great because, it's so numbers driven, but at the same time, sometimes you can kind of fall into a trap of always thinking that you have to be at your best. So, but if you're working towards improving, and you're going to be better off. And the PRs will kind of happen when they happen. But just realize that as you get older, as you get more mileage, it's going to slow down a little bit. And again, to get to like that theoretical peak, the closer you are to the top of the peak, the steeper the mountain is. It may not always be worth it to get to the tippy top, but I do think for most people, if you can kind of operate on like the 80-20 rule, can you get, maybe do things a little bit more reasonably, and you could be like operating at like 80% of your capacity, more often. I think you're going to get further like that, and it's going to be more sustainable. So anyways, and even something like myself, like, doing a single lift competition versus a 3-lift meet, it's much more manageable. I did like a squat, like kind of exhibition the other day. I kind of surprised myself. Most of my training lifts have just been general. I've been squatting mostly high bar and heels and stuff, so that's been a really good strength builder for me. Most of my weights have been like, 600 or less. But I was able to hit like a pretty comfortable, and again, this isn't a powerlifting gear. I added knee wraps and a squat suit, but still. But I did a really comfortable 804. Could have been a little bit deeper, but I felt like I had like another 30 to 50 pounds, and that's a really good result for me. Again, I'm a little heavier now, so that's part of it, but that's the most I've done in like the better part of like 10 months. So pretty happy with that. And again, just to focus on the pursuit of strength, focus on the seeking out competition and camaraderie with like-minded individuals and yourself. That's my main message that I'm going to continue to kind of harp on. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've been thinking about like why do I gravitate towards certain meet directors, certain federations? Why do I gravitate towards certain types of training? So anyway, so I think like in our kind of system, in the West Side system, you kind of like get a lot of more variety and a lot more general training, and I think that's kind of missing with a lot of people. So there's ways to kind of weave in the specificity when it's needed. But I think at a certain point, I think it's good just to be kind of strong everywhere, and just be a little bit more well-rounded as you get older, a little bit less specialized, as you get older. There's going to be periods of time, like in the very early parts of your career, I think it's good to build a good foundation. When you get to the intermediate stage and you're kind of in your athletic prime, I think that's the time where you can really kind of squeeze out the specificity, your frequency a little bit more. And that's what you're kind of seeing with a lot of these junior lifters, a lot of these teenage lifters. It's just, I feel like they're kind of shortening their lifespan a little bit with the amount of frequency they're doing, but we'll kind of see how it happens. But anyways, I'm gonna get my head right. This will be a PR attempt on the Hampton bar. It's about 150 pounds or so. Let's get it. All right, so we got 67.5 kilos, which is just shy of 149. So I'll have to double check my records. I'm gonna start to kind of keep better, but I'm 99% sure this is a PR in the Hampton bar. This is probably about what I'll open with at the contest, and then kind of go from there. I like to take like, you know, either 2.5 to 5 kilo jumps, like at most. In a strict curl meet, a 5 kilo jump's a very big jump, especially so in training. So once I get to my working sets, once I kind of get to a meet, you know, 10 pounds is kind of like my limit. So even like 5 kilos might be like a little bit on the outside of, you know, what's reasonable, but something in that range. Also, I'm just not really messing with like the fractional kilos and stuff yet. I'll kind of do that probably more in the final like wave. So anyways, just shy of 150 pounds, 67.5 kilos, PR attempt. All right, a little harder than I wanted, but I got it. Felt like the weight's moving on the side, but all right. Top set. Now we're gonna add the bands and do a little bit more. It's really funny to rewatch some of these sets because the first two went really smooth, and that last one just felt like I was grinding forever. And part of it got out in front of me. So if you look at the kind of the speed of it on video, it didn't look too bad, but it felt like a 10 out of 10. Whereas I felt like the first two were, 8.5, 9, Anyways, it gets really hard, but luckily in the meet, I thought the first rep looked really good, which is the most important rep. And I'm getting like a good rhythm. So the main thing that I'll have to kind of work on in that final 3-week phase is start commands. So that's kind of like the only thing that's going to be a big variable, but that's what I'm saying, open light enough. In strict curl, because it's a single lift event, you could open and you have allowed for smaller jumps. I think it's okay to be a little bit more, basically you're going to have like a tighter cluster of attempts in terms of like the load selection. So a lot of the old adage for like powerlifting, especially for like squats and deadlifts, is that if you could triple it, you can kind of open with it. So 90%, even upwards of 93% is like a good opener. With strict curl, you might even be upwards of closer to 95%, or more something that you could double versus triple, just because again it's going to be smaller increases in weight. Depending on like what technique you use, it can be a very technical movement, but again, it's the margin for error is like is a lot smaller with these light. I think with the upper body lifts especially, just at a certain point it's going to be hard to kind of muscle the weight up. So anyways, happy with the PR. I wish that last rep moved a little bit better, but now we're going to do some overload. So this is 72.5, I believe. I'll double check my kilos. I'm still more of a freedom units kind of guy. Yeah, 72.5 kilos. This is about 160. So this is kind of what I did last week for my top single. But anyways, things are kind of trending. So the whole idea of like kind of wave loading, wave training, all these different things, a lot of people call them, you know, blocks of training. It's all kind of semantics, but I think of things of like a phase of training. But anyways, you know, each wave we want to get a little bit higher. So whether it's step loading, wave, you know, whatever, there's different terminology and different concepts. But the idea is that we're making some progress, kind of backtracking, making some progress, backtracking. So some people might do, like in a block of training, some people might like focus on a particular rep range for several weeks in a row. And then a lot of, you know, what's more, you know, common in the type of the approach that I'm kind of doing, if, you know, is in like a peaking type block, is that's more condensed and we're kind of repeating like more frequent cycles. It's going to allow you for more exposures to these rep ranges kind of spread out. So again, the way I'm doing things is that I'm doing, started last phase, but I'm doing, you know, 3, 2, 1 on my max effort day, essentially 3 times. So I'm getting a lot of touches. So hopefully, like, if I could PR, again, my triples again, so now this was like a 2.5 kilo PR. I may not be able to do that. So like next phase, I might just, you know, put like a half kilo, you know, I might take a smaller increase just to be like, to play it more safe and make sure I'm not kind of missing my reps. But in any case, I'm going to do some overload work. So a couple of things you can kind of see here. This is not a perfect setup, but it's the way I set things up every single time. It's just a kind of a way to kind of get some heavier exposures at the top. It's going to assist me in the bottom. The thing that I don't necessarily like about it is also kind of pulling you back and not just straight up. But this is kind of a setup that I have, and it's consistent. So I find it pretty reliable. So it's just something where, you know, that's whereas the chains is going to be a little bit more. I like chains just generally over bands just because of a lot of different reasons, but it's not kind of like, sometimes the bands are going to give you some artificial stability, whereas like the chains, you could argue, depending on how you set it up, will not. So the chains are a little bit more free moving, and you still have to stabilize the weight a little bit. So this is actually going to help kind of, hypothetically, if I did get out of position, the bands are going to kind of help pull it back in. So it's kind of helping your bar path, or it's kind of dictating your bar path a little bit. So those are the things to consider, whether you're doing, you know, reverse bands from the top or bands from the bottom. The bands are going to like kind of pull the bar back to its anchor point. So that's just something to consider. But I do like these but again, I'm still doing chains on another day. But if I had to kind of pick one or the other, I think chains is a good way to kind of, again, whether it's overloading the top, building explosive strength. But just for the there's something about, again, we call this the future method, about, okay, like, so now I'm able to handle like closer to 100% or beyond 100% more frequently. So I'm just not going to be psychologically as afraid or as anxious to touch 160 because I've literally loaded on the bar and I've literally lifted it, regardless of if it's with some help or not. So, and the reason I like this versus just like partial range of motion is you're able to kind of go through the entire competition technique. So I think it's a little bit better for skill development. So anyways, hopefully that helps. And again, all these concepts apply for powerlifting and other strength sports as well. So that's why, again, some people, whether you think the strict curl training is exciting or not, try to take the concepts and use them for your context. So whether you're a strongman, a powerlifter, weightlifter, you know, there are like kind of a lot of crossover and things you can kind of take. And I think it's good to learn from disciplines outside of what you're trying to do. That's what I've always kind of done. So anyways, we're going to do an overload set here. All right, we got 72.5 kilos on the bar. All right, felt pretty good. Definitely getting like a little bit stiff in my upper body, but weight's moving good. Just got to be conscious of that, but you only got to do 1 rep at the meet. So we're going to go up another 5 kilos for the heavy hold, and that will conclude our max effort session of the day. I'm pretty happy with that. And I think, my nervous system is definitely a little bit, well, just like my lower back and my nervous system from that 804 squat. I did a 365 kilo 804 squat 2 days ago at this point. So it's definitely a factor, but I'm going to still kind of keep my general strength up. I also did about a 600 I want to say it was a 270 kilo deadlift, whatever 595 is. So I had 5 reds with without the collars. So essentially I did an 800-pound squat and a 600-pound deadlift, which is heavy for me right now. Again, it's not my all-time best, but my kind of idea is that if you're just generally strong, this is something I talked about with Bruce Knox and also with Cooper. It just depending on what strength sport you're training for and competing for, essentially what becomes your assistance exercises will kind of change. I don't know if strict curl has any true carryover really to anything else outside of in terms of powerlifting. I think strict curl could have some potential benefits for, I think, combat athletes and stuff like that. Potentially even for strongmen. Definitely, there seems to be a high, with grip sport and arm wrestling seems to be pretty popular amongst some strict curlers. But anyways, but yeah, if you kind of want to get this half of your body kind of stronger, as well as your kind of back and shoulders, if you kind of use more of the Knox or Cooper techniques. Anyways, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Those are both PRs on this bar. I'm definitely getting better with the timing and the positions. I'm definitely not as good with reps, but I'm happy with how the singles are doing. So we're going to do a heavy hold. And then we'll kind of go into, I'm not sure, I'll probably do, I'm not sure if I'll make the intro its own video or, because that was 10 minutes, but. All right, so we got 77.5 kilos on the bar. This may be a little bit outside of, 170 is maybe a little bit of a stretch for what I'll try at the meet, but depending on the circumstance, depending on the competition, it may be something I have to attempt if I want to, potentially win. Because again, I'm not really, anything will be kind of a PR on this bar, technically in a meet. So, but this would be probably around the top end of what I would even try to attempt, but it probably a little outside of my wheelhouse in terms of what would be a reasonable, but it's still got some time to get stronger and more efficient. But anyways, just something to consider when you're doing heavy holds. I think anywhere from 100 to 120% of either your goal or your actual 1 rep max is a good idea. Anything outside that's probably just not useful at that point. But you could apply this to your squat, your bench, your deadlift. Your squat, your bench, curl. Those would be kind of my top. I did try to do it a little bit with overhead press as well. But again, that's usually not a competitive event. But you probably could, but even for a weightlifter, even if you necessarily can't put it overhead, just getting it to your shoulders, those sorts of things. Weightlifters sometimes would just do heavy front squat holds just for nervous system development. Let's put you back. All right, about 170 on the bar. again, probably a little bit not reasonable, just because I have a hard time even just taking that weight out. But maybe 165 will go. Maybe I'm just getting a little tired. Anyways, it's our first mic'd up session in a minute. Triples phase, triples week, whatever. About 6 weeks out from Mr. America, we'll do probably a video, going into, a couple of weeks in between. I'm going to get some speed work in there as well. I probably won't bring the mic to the commercial gym because that's kind of corny, but I will do it here because, again, this is our private garage gym. If you guys enjoyed the video, guys, please share it. If you guys want more stuff like this, please comment, subscribe. I'm not really active with the YouTube comments just because I've gotten a lot of, negative comments when I was starting out. So, but DMs and Instagram is a good way to reach me. Email is a good way to reach me. But if you guys really like the content, for people that have been, been doing this since 2006. I forget when I started. I think I started my YouTube channel in 2010. So I've been around for a bit. And I've always been trying to provide education for you all. So I do appreciate it. If you guys want to see more of this type of content, let me know if this is better than the voiceovers. Again, Instagram's a better way to let me know. And if there's other things that you want to see, let me know. But remember, it's about the pursuit of strength. Seek out competition and camaraderie. Until next time, guys, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.